you very much.
Congratulations on Foundling. Just came out yesterday, right?
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Very intrigued. We've been playing everything. I just played Please Forgive Me this morning with, Babylon, everything, Stella the artist. So really psyched to be listening to this and very, very excited to be introducing this album to our River listeners. And I'm curious about the making of the album. I know that you did it sort of as a private side project while you were recording Draw the Line, and I understand that this was in the church studio, and it's got a little bit of a history that Annie Lennox and Tartan Carpets are involved in all kinds of interesting stuff. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about this?
Yeah, well, I bought a studio before I realised the music business was about to come crashing down around my ears, so I'm definitely not going to sell it on to anybody that's ever walking around with any money anymore. It was owned by Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, who gradually bought the whole place. It's an old church, and he kitted it out with tartan carpets in his Stewart tartan. That's the way it looks. I have modified a few areas to take the glare away. It's hard to concentrate. So that's where I work now. That's like home for my music. So I made Life in Slow Motion there. Done quite a few bits and pieces, and then these two records were recorded. First Draw the Line and then Foundling, but all at the same time really. I didn't have a contract on the go, so I was free to set my own deadlines, so there weren't any. And I had a new band and I was kind of fired up. And the writing began to happen in floods of ideas. So I just kept going, and really we ended up with far too much material, and at a certain point I had to sort of take a little break and look at it all, and then I could see two distinct sort of soundscapes emerging, and I decided there were two records to be made, that once I'd finished the first to my satisfaction I would go back and finish the second and then mix it. Because I've been in a similar position before, but if you don't get it all done at the time, you're never going to come off tour in a year and a half and go, oh, let's go and work on the stuff we were doing 2 years ago. You don't feel like it, you just want to do something new. So I made a point this time of finishing it off. So it's really, Draw the Line's a little bit more upbeat and a little bit more a few bigger songs on there, things that have got a chance of getting played on the radio, I suppose. So it's got a bit more dynamic.
No, don't worry. We're playing it. Yeah.
And then Foundling is the quieter sort of side of things. So it's a very understated record in places. I took the dynamic of quietness as far as I've ever taken it. I mean, I think the thing about working for so long in the studio is that you get very at one with, it's a bit like being on tour, it becomes very automatic to you. You start to think studio style musical thoughts, which are based more on what sounds good in there, like with the mics and everything, rather than just how you like to play and how you're comfortable to play and try and capture that. You start to play towards the sound that sounds good, and the softer you can hit the notes, the more they bloom onto the mics. If you just think of how a microphone works, this is boring technical stuff, but really, it's at the heart of making this record. So it's just a diaphragm in there, and when you chuck out a load of volume like I do when I sing full on, it just hits the thing really hard, and it sort of retracts for a moment and has to find a new setting for itself. So the sound all shrinks down and gets harder and smaller. But if you can just, record with a steadiness and a certainty, but at a very low volume, and sing as quiet as you can and still get those notes, it blossoms in a completely different way and fills all the space that's there to be filled. Even just a piano and a vocal will just fill the whole tape up, and you just think it doesn't need anything else, or hardly does. So that was at the core of what I was thinking when I recorded some of these tracks, and they kind of got born in quiet moments in between working with the band on stuff, because we decided to record everything live. If we had 3 or 4 bad days, or days when we were working stuff out, it gets quite stressful when you've got nothing to show for it, like 3 days work and nothing at the end of it. You know, people, you start accusing each other. It was your fault. You just you were slowing down. You know, well, you should finish the lyrics. You know, etc., etc. So you get yourself all tetchy, and it was good every now and again to go out. Okay, it's Wednesday. Take Thursday and Friday off, and I'll see you on Monday. So then I'd have just the studio to myself, sort of thing. So it might be just me and the engineer. And I could either listen back to stuff, try doing a bit of overdubbing on it, or I could try a different acoustic version of a song, or just write in the quiet that was left when everyone was gone, because all the equipment was still set up. So it's like the feeling of everyone having just left the room was there, and it's like a nighttime feeling when the world goes quiet. So it's a nice environment to work in. So I felt like all the music of the previous however many months was all around me, and in that I would start to write, and always with a mind to recording. So anyway, that's how this record was born, and it's a quiet record, it's a fan's record really.
Well, you've got plenty of those here today.
I must say I'm very pleased with it, and I think that my writing is to the fore on the whole thing. Obviously you get a lot of vocal and you get a lot of lyrics, because there's not much to distract from it. It's
absolutely beautiful, and I was very struck by you're a fairly young person to be thinking such deep thoughts about your own mortality. But you know, there are things about, you know, the old chair and forgetting, which really, I told him last night, I was listening to all this, and I was like, pretty much lost it, you know, thinking about my dad getting old. And I think you had a little story about your grandmother sitting by your window. And
I mean, it's a sad story. Well, I find the whole thing very heart-wrenching. You know, I mean, I know the world's full of sort of famine, chaos, disorder and suffering, but you know, somehow when I see an old person sort of, and their loneliness, it hits me harder, especially if I know them. So it's just where we're going to end up. And yeah, you know, she sits there with the lights on, not realising that everyone can look in, you know, in a chair on her own. But the way that song, anyway, those images, those two songs, I suppose, forgetting not so much, but Old Chair is obviously very specifically about that.
Wasn't it a song that started out as about an animated dog or something, well, and it turned into about old people?
Yeah, doesn't everyone write about it? I got approached to do some music for this animation thing, and it was in its infancy, and you never know, it could have become a huge global hit, and then I would have been going, ha ha ha. But it didn't. So anyway, that was another thing I was doing all at the same time as recording the two records. But their working title was The Old Chair. And it was about these three dogs, and one's an old, they're all sort of orphan dogs, if you like, they've been adopted. And they've got their neurosis, each is individually sort of screwed up in its own dog-like way. The old one had this one chair that it used to sit on all the time. And it goes out into the garden one day, and when it comes back in through the dog hatch or whatever, the chair's gone and there's a new chair there. And the idea is that it's thinking, well, is that what's going to happen to me? I'm going to be replaced. So that was the idea behind the thing. But I just wrote instrumental music for the animation. I didn't think words were necessary.
It was beautiful, and you had a lot of strings.
I think it was just that it put the line, the old chair, into my head, and the thought of what they were trying to get at with this little story they were writing. So I sat down one day and just literally, it was a bit like how This Year's Love was written. I just played through it, da-da-da, and just went, oh, the old chair, and then off we went. And the thing was written in about an hour.
Really?
And done, and then I cut it on my own, it sounded good, and then we put the drums on and cut it again. And that kind of knife edge kind of recording, but it came out great. And then just strings really, and because there's so little going on, you can really hear the strings. It's probably the biggest moment. Yeah, it's probably the biggest moment of the record actually. Well,
I know you can't do that because there are no strings and the piano's low, but What would you like to play from Foundling for us?
Oh, I was actually going to start with one from Draw the Line.
Oh, awesome. Let me get